Dear listeners, get ready to immerse yourself in a story of suspense and mystery that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss another captivating tale. Today, we delve into one of Agatha Christie's most remarkable detective stories, The Double Clue. This tale stands out not just for its gripping plot, but for introducing a character who would leave a lasting impact on Hercule Poirot, the legendary Belgian detective, Countess Vera Rosov. First published in 1923, this story is a perfect reflection of Agatha Christie's fascination with complex international characters, many of whom, like the Countess, were shaped by the turbulent aftermath of World War I. The story captures a time when European aristocrats were forced to flee their homelands, leaving behind a web of secrets and untold histories. Vera Rosov, with her Russian background and enigmatic nature, intrigues Poirot, adding a rare emotional layer to his otherwise rational persona. Christie's knack for crafting characters who blur the lines between good and evil elevates this case to something more profound, making it not just a tale of theft, but a complex exploration of human nature. The Double Clue, a web of suspicion and secrets. But before we get into the heart of the mystery, one key rule must be clear: no publicity. This was the mantra of Mr. Mark Hardman, a man who had called upon Poirot in a state of absolute panic. "It's the rubies, Monsieur Poirot, and the emerald necklace," Mr. Hardman whispered desperately, his voice quivering. "They've disappeared. They're gone." Poirot listened attentively, his sharp eyes never leaving Hardman's face as the man fidgeted in his seat, glancing nervously around the room. "How did this happen?" Poirot asked, his tone calm, yet full of quiet authority. The answer came quickly. A tea party, a handful of guests, and an unsupervised collection of priceless jewels. Hardman's collection was renowned, with medieval gems that told stories of times long past. Yet, in the midst of the afternoon's festivities, disaster struck. A small wall safe, hidden behind a cabinet, Hardman continued. "After everyone had left, I found it open, rifled, the jewels gone. What should I do, Poirot? What should I do?" His voice grew desperate. Poirot's mind was already working. He knew that this wasn't just a case of stolen jewels, it was a case of stolen trust. The guests, friends of Mr. Hardman, some more familiar than others, had all been in the room. But who could have done such a thing? Hardman had already dismissed the thought of involving the police. Too much risk, too much scandal. So, he called upon Poirot, hoping the famous detective could solve this delicate problem discreetly. "Tell me, Mr. Hardman," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing, "who was the last to leave this room?" "The South African millionaire, Mr. Johnston," Hardman replied, almost nervously. He lingered for a moment, but surely it could not be him. Poirot remained silent, letting the man stew in his own thoughts. "Did anyone else return to the room after you moved to the studio?" Hardman nodded gravely. "Yes, 3 others. Countess Vera Rosov, Mr. Bernard Parker, and Lady Rancour. Each of them came back at some point. Countess Rosov appeared mesmerized by my fan collection." Poirot's interest piqued. "Tell me more about this Countess." "Ah, Vera," Hardman sighed. "A charming Russian lady, a member of the old aristocracy. She's only just arrived in the country, but her presence, it's magnetic. She's not the type to miss an opportunity to inspect fine things. But I can't shake the suspicion, Poirot." Her gaze lingered too long on that safe. Poirot nodded, his thoughts sharp. "And the others?" "Parker came for a case of miniatures to show Lady Rancour," Hardman explained. "Lady Rancour was only retrieving her handbag. She's a middle-aged woman with strong character, very devoted to charity. She wouldn't have the nerve for something like this." Poirot's mind was spinning, analyzing every word, every pause. So, we have 4 suspects, each with a motive, each with access. The Countess, the millionaire, the young Mr. Parker, and the devoted Lady Rancour. But who stands out? The detective's gaze sharpened. Mr. Hardman, tell me more about Mr. Parker. The mention of Parker seemed to unsettle Hardman further. Well, Parker is a young man, very much part of London's high society. He's not quite in the inner circles, but he knows his way around. He's helped me on a few occasions with private sales, handling delicate matters of antiques, including some jewels brought by Countess Rosov. I trust him. Poirot's expression softened, but his mind was sharp as ever. You trust him implicitly? Hardman nodded, his voice steady despite the tension. I've never had any reason not to. Poirot paused, considering the facts. So, what do you suspect, Mr. Hardman? Do you suspect any one of your friends, or all of them? Hardman shifted uncomfortably. I suspect none, or perhaps all. It's a matter of trust, you see. Poirot looked at him, unblinking. But you do suspect one. Tell me, is it the Countess, or Mr. Parker, perhaps Lady Rancour, or Mr. Johnston? Hardman swallowed. Poirot was relentless in his pursuit of the truth, and Hardman had nowhere to hide now. You drive me into a corner, Miss Poirot. Bernard Parker protested, his voice tight with frustration. Indeed, I do, Poirot replied coolly, eyes narrowing with purpose, but I am simply following the trail of evidence. A sudden tension hung in the air as Hardman nervously shifted from one foot to another, unable to suppress his unease. The guilt of his own secrets was a heavy weight on his shoulders. He sighed, rubbing his temples, torn between doing what was right and preserving the reputation of his social circle. Lady Rancour, you see, is of noble descent, but there are whispers about her aunt, a woman plagued by a, shall we say, unfortunate affliction, Hardman murmured, casting a quick glance toward Poirot. A kleptomaniac, Miss Poirot, a tragic fate for any family. Poirot's lips curled into a slight knowing smile. How convenient, a family heirloom, lost again. A kleptomaniac aunt who can't resist. It all adds up, doesn't it? Please, Hardman pleaded, his voice rising with an edge of desperation. You understand, I cannot have a scandal. What would it do to my reputation, to my friends? Poirot studied the safe with careful deliberation, peering into the depths as if seeking answers beyond the visible. This safe, he muttered, it is an intriguing thing. Notice how it doesn't shut properly, almost as if it were tampered with. He gently tugged the door open wider, and there it was, a glove caught in the hinge. A man's glove. Poirot held it up, his fingers brushing against the fabric with an almost delicate reverence. What is this? He mused aloud. Could it belong to your thief? No, no, Hardman protested, shaking his head quickly. It is not one of mine. Poirot's keen eyes flickered over the rest of the contents, and then he reached down, retrieving something small but significant. A cigarette case, he announced, holding it up for inspection. But not just any case, Mr. Hardman. This one is rather telling, wouldn't you agree? Hardman took the object, inspecting it with a mixture of surprise and confusion. It looks very similar to mine, he admitted. But these initials... His voice trailed off in realization. A B and P. Aha, Poirot said, raising an eyebrow with a knowing gleam. It seems Mr. Bernard Parker's initials are far more involved than you'd care to admit. Hardman's face blanched. Parker? Are you sure? It can't be? It seems so, Poirot confirmed. A careless young man, indeed. But tell me, Mr. Hardman, Does he seem like the type to throw a glove and a cigarette case away so haphazardly? The pieces were coming together rapidly. Poirot could already see the young man in his mind, self-absorbed, careless, thinking the world revolved around him. "I'll leave this in your capable hands, then," Hartman murmured, though his reluctance to involve the police was clear. "But if it is Parker, you must take swift action. He cannot be allowed to ruin everything." Poirot nodded, his mind already far ahead, processing each new revelation as it came. "I have no doubt that tomorrow will bring us clarity. For now, we wait." As they left the house, Poirot glanced at Hastings. "It's always the most unexpected ones, isn't it? A charming Russian countess, a South African millionaire, and we never even suspected the innocent-looking Bernard Parker." "Quite right," Hastings agreed, following Poirot's lead as they strolled through Berry Street, where their next move would unfold. The street was quiet, the setting sun casting long shadows over the pavement. Then, as if summoned by the mystery itself, the door of the flat flew open with a gust of wind, and in swept Countess Vera Rosov, her presence unmistakable, her coat a blur of sable and furs. A woman who commanded attention the moment she entered. "I demand to know what this is about, Miss Poirot," she exclaimed, her voice laced with righteous fury. "How dare you accuse that poor boy? It is a scandal. I know him well. He is as innocent as a lamb. Never would he steal." Poirot, unfazed, extended his hand and showed her the black moire cigarette case. "Is this his?" he asked, his voice calm but unwavering. The Countess froze, her eyes flickering with uncertainty before she quickly responded, "Yes, it is his." "What of it? He must be set free. You have no right to—" "And this glove?" Poirot interrupted, retrieving the other glove, now placed beside the first. The Countess looked at it, her composure faltering for just a moment before she spat in defiance. "How should I know? One glove is the same as another." Poirot's eyes narrowed as he observed her reaction. "Ah, Countess, a woman of passion, but perhaps not the best judge of character." With the same dramatic flair as she had entered, Vera Rosov spun on her heel, storming out of the room in a whirl of perfume and fur, leaving Poirot and Hastings in stunned silence. "What a woman," Poirot mused, his voice tinged with a trace of admiration. "Could a countess really wear genuine furs, I wonder?" "One can only guess," Hastings replied, but Poirot was already moving on, his mind calculating the next steps. The game had changed, and Poirot was more determined than ever to solve this puzzle. "Tomorrow, Hastings, tomorrow we will see just how careless Mr. Bernard Parker really is." And so, as the mystery deepened, Poirot and Hastings ventured further into the intricate world of deception, intrigue, and hidden motives, a world where appearances could no longer be trusted. The hunt for the truth was far from over. It was a quiet afternoon when Lane, my companion for the day, and I set out to see our friend Johnston. He was out, but we had the opportunity to meet with his private secretary. As it turned out, Johnston had only recently arrived from South Africa, and it was his first time in England. His interests lay in precious stones, a fact that didn't escape my attention. "Isn't he interested in precious stones?" I inquired, to which Poirot responded with a small smile. "Gold mining would be a more accurate description," laughed the secretary. Poirot seemed deep in thought as we left the secretary's office. Later that evening, I was quite surprised to find my friend engrossed in a Russian grammar book. "Good heavens, Poirot!" I exclaimed. "Are you learning Russian to converse with the Countess in her own language?" He turned to me, his face full of amusement. "She certainly would not listen to my English, my friend. But surely," he paused for effect, "well-born Russians invariably speak French." His words left me intrigued, but also confused. "You are a mine of information, Hastings," Puo said. "I will cease puzzling over the intricacies of the Russian alphabet." His dramatic gesture as he tossed the book aside didn't fool me. There was a gleam in his eyes that I recognized, a sign that he was pleased with himself. "Perhaps you doubt her being truly Russian?" I asked, trying to understand his plans. "Ah, no, she is Russian all right," he replied, but he wouldn't say more. I couldn't help but feel something was amiss, but Puo's usual air of mystery surrounded him. The next morning brought no new developments, but Puo was undeterred. He had decided to visit Mr. Hardman early in the day. We found the elderly gentleman at home, appearing slightly calmer than the previous day. "Well, Ampo, any news?" he asked eagerly. Puo handed him a slip of paper. "That is the person who took the jewels," he announced. "Shall I put matters in the hands of the police, or would you prefer I recover the jewels discreetly?" Mr. Hardman stared at the paper, shocked. After a long pause, he spoke. "Most astonishing. I would infinitely prefer no scandal. I give you carte blanche, Mapuo. I am sure you will be discreet." Our next move was to hail a taxi and head for the Carlton, where we were to meet the Countess. As soon as we arrived, Puo inquired for her and was swiftly escorted to her suite. She greeted us warmly, a brilliant smile on her face. Dressed in a magnificent negligee of barbaric design, she extended her hands to Puo. "Monsieur Po, you have succeeded," she exclaimed. "You have cleared that poor infant, Madame la Comtesse. Your friend Mr. Parker is perfectly safe from arrest." Po remained composed, despite the Countess's exuberant praise. "Ah, but you are the clever little man," she continued. "Superb, and so quick, too." Puo nodded graciously but cut her off, focusing on the matter at hand. "Madam, I have promised Mr. Hardman that the jewels shall be returned to him today. Therefore, I would be extremely obliged if you would place them in my hands without delay." The Countess, seemingly unaffected by the urgency in his tone, lit a cigarette and sat back, blowing smoke rings. She stared at Puo for several moments before bursting into laughter. Rising, she crossed the room to a bureau and retrieved a black silk handbag, tossing it lightly to Puo. "We Russians," she said nonchalantly, "on the contrary, practice prodigality. To do that, unfortunately, one must have money." Puo took the handbag, impressed with her demeanor. "You are too amiable, madame," he said, smiling. "But since you were keeping your taxi waiting, what else could I do?" "I am afraid I will not remain long in London," she said, her voice suddenly distant. "But I hope we meet again elsewhere." Puo bowed. "Perhaps," he said, "but I must return this to you." He handed her the cigarette case we had found in the safe. She accepted it with hardly a change of expression, just a raised eyebrow and a murmured, "I see." Once outside, Puo was animated with praise. What a woman! Not a word of protest, no bluff, just one quick glance, and she had assessed the situation correctly. I tell you, Hastings, a woman who can accept defeat with such a carefree smile will go far. She is dangerous. She has nerves of steel. I was taken aback by his assessment. "When did you first suspect the Countess?" I asked. Puo took a moment before answering. "It was the glove and the cigarette case, the double clue, if you will, that worried me. Bernard Parker might have easily dropped one or the other, but not both. No, that would have been too careless. If someone else had placed them there to incriminate him, only one would suffice. So I was forced to the conclusion that one of the two items didn't belong to Parker. Initially, I thought the cigarette case was his, but when I found the second glove, I realized I was wrong." "But whose was the cigarette case?" I asked, intrigued. It could not belong to Lady Rancour, for her initials were wrong, Puo continued. Mr. Johnston's initials were also incorrect. Only if he were using a false name could it have belonged to him. Puo then explained how he had interviewed Johnston's secretary and found that everything about him was above board. But the Countess, he said, she had brought the jewels from Russia. It would be easy for her to remove the stones from their settings and make them unidentifiable. She could have simply picked up one of Parker's gloves from the hallway and placed it in the safe. But what about the cigarette case? I was puzzled. But if it was hers, why did it have BP on it? Puo smiled gently. Ah, Hastings, in the Russian alphabet, B is V and P is R. So the case did indeed belong to her, though the initials were misleading. I could only shake my head in amazement at Puo's deductions. You couldn't expect me to guess that. I don't know Russian. Nor do I, Puo replied, which is why I bought my little book and urged it on your attention. He sighed, clearly impressed with the Countess, though a part of me wondered if we had truly seen the last of her. A remarkable woman, Puo said thoughtfully. I have a feeling I shall meet her again.